Productive Pastor 35 with Eric Hoke. What's going on, friends? Chad Brooks back here with Productive Pastor. I'm excited about the conversation I've got to share with you today. So this is a continuation of the Pandemic Pastor series, and my friend Eric Hoke is one of my favorite Twitter follows. Just the way he talks about ministry is such an interesting and funny way. But Eric is a co-vocational pastor in the Bronx. I feel like I learned the term co-vocational from Eric. And is that something that I'm doing right now? More and more folks you see are in ministry, but also having other jobs. Eric also is the founder of IHelpPastorsGetJobs.com, where he talks about what does it mean for pastors to also have jobs in the marketplace. Provides tons of great services there with that. And so there's a lot of reasons our conversation with Eric today is interesting, but more so, like, what does it mean to plant and lead a church plant in the Bronx, which is so different from many of our ministry situations, but also how that happens during the pandemic and the lessons that are learned that are there. So, and just encourage you, just enjoy this episode. We're going to jump into this conversation. I'll be back on the backside and tell you about a couple cool things we have going on. So let's get into this conversation with Eric. Well, I'm here with Eric Hoke, and we're going to talk this next, another layer of the Pandemic Pastor conversation. So Eric, welcome to Productive Pastor.
I'm glad to be here, Chad.
Well, I know that we connected and started tweeting back and forth about 6 months ago, and your ministry looks really, really different. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it from the outside. Now I know we have a decent amount of mutual friends on Twitter because I see the interaction and stuff. And we're going to get back into that, I think, even deeper further on. But just tell us about your immediate context and the church you serve and where you live and what that looks like for you.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I'm a church planter. So I planted All Saints Community Church in the South Bronx of New York City in 2017. So for those who are kind of unfamiliar with the South Bronx, we're the birthplace of hip hop. We're the home of the New York Yankees. We're the home of the largest urban zoo in the world. And our zip code where our church is planted is also in the poorest congressional district in America, which sits in New York City, the most expensive city in America. So when All Saints was planted in 2017, it didn't take a genius to realize, you know what? There's probably not a whole lot of money in this space. So I'm going to have to pursue a co-vo/bivocational route. I thought, as a person who went to Bible college and seminary and worked in larger, more established churches, that Bi-Vo co-vo ministry was kind of like the JV of ministry. Yeah. And once everybody in the South Bronx heard my dynamic preaching and my amazing leadership gifts, and we blew up to 300 people, I could finally go full time and be a real pastor. Well, obviously, 5 years later, one pandemic, and 3 kids later as well. I had 3 kids since we launched the church, so that's another story. One way to grow, right?
Yeah, that's Presbyterian growth.
That's Presbyterian growth, exactly. Is still co-vocational and really enjoying it and finding it to be a really great way to sustain ministry long term in a place like New York City, which is extremely expensive when you're serving a context that's extremely and historically underserved and disenfranchised.
I was thinking about this earlier. For a long time, New York City was not this place where people were looking for church planting or leadership. Once Keller kind of made his big, huge push, I feel like a lot of folks have forgot about New York City. But in the last few years, New York City is turning into one of the places a lot of people are looking at for leadership.
It's really interesting because post 9/11, the same thing happened as post COVID. Post 9/11, the whole nation kind of looked at New York and maybe even the whole world like, wow, they endured this huge tragedy. And folks like Church of the City with John Tyson, some of your listeners know him. Folks like Nelson Searcy of the Journey Church, like just a huge population of church plants, church startups, ministries kind of emerged from that disaster. And thankfully, it seems like in 2022, a similar thing has happened. Not that COVID was a good thing, of course it wasn't. But New York City is a highly dense, highly populated 8.5 million people in a small plot of land place. So pandemics impact us in a profound way. So I'm seeing now more and more people showing interest in New York and what God is doing here, and it's quite exciting to see.
Yeah. Yeah. So, just talk about, you said that in 2017, part of y'all's initial design was, you were going to be co-vocational because you saw there was just no way possible to support. And so you didn't have kids at that moment. So it's just you and your wife.
Just me and my wife and living in a $3,000 a month, two-bedroom apartment and doing a lay of the land to realize the largest non-Catholic church in my zip code was 75 adults.
Yeah.
So even if you did some napkin math on how many people would it take for me to sustain the salary plus the operational cost of the church, it came out to about 150 folks.
Yeah.
And realizing I'd have to be twice the size of the largest church in my zip code, which has been around since 1986, the year before I was born, and I'm a corn-fed kid from the middle of the country, I don't think that's a very winning bet. So why don't I take a step back, swallow my pride, go get a job, and slowly allow God to build His church in and through what He's doing here in the Bronx, as opposed to thinking, okay, I'm going to just go all in and hopefully in 2 years have this vibrant, growing, humongous congregation that can support my life. And so yeah, it was like it's funny, Chad. Like I'm not one of those guys who like strategically chose to go Bible because I thought it was a brilliant idea. I went that way out of necessity, and then like kind of 5 years in, realized, oh shoot, I did do something really special because post COVID, like we're still here. A lot of churches aren't.
And I think that in that one of the previous episodes I told you about the person whose church, my friend Fernie here in Louisiana, who's supposed to launch the weekend everything shut down. They have a very, very different reality of what their church community looks like. And he'll say now, he said, man, what we designed and intended, and they ran like a 2-year launch strategy. I mean, they were playing the long game. He said that wouldn't look anything like what I would want this place to look like. I can't imagine it being anything except this adaptation. It's like you're saying now that your co-vocational strategy, like that's just who you are. That's what you want.
Yes.
So if I'm doing my math correct, y'all planned in 2017, and you were figuring it could take a couple of years to get to a point to where you might not have to be co-vocational. And that's right about the time that the bottom fell out with the pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. So New York City got hit with the pandemic hard, got hit with it very early. In the South Bronx where I live, got hit really tough. It's an underserved community. You don't have access to the health cares and the facilities that you might in other parts of the city. A lot of folks in New York who had the money and the means left. They
Yeah.
went to live in an Airbnb in rural Pennsylvania or upstate New York or their house on Long Island. The folks in my congregation in my neighborhood did not.
Like
So
Samaritan's Purse didn't come set up stations in the South Bronx, did they?
no, they did not. They did not come for us. So what we had to do is I realized pretty quickly that despite my own, pride and ego, nobody comes to All Saints Church to hear Eric preach. I know that's a shocker, but they don't. They come because of the community that they provided in All Saints Church. So I said we could do what every other church is doing and put a video of my head on Facebook talking every Sunday for 30 minutes. Or we can just all hop on a Zoom meeting every Sunday morning and have a conversational facilitation style sermon, small group, whatever you want to call it. And we just did the goofiest stuff, Chad. It was so much fun. We did Kahoot, we did Hangman, we did breakout rooms, and that was kind of our transition to the virtual space in the pandemic and trying to stop the spread. We did not do like the pastor preaching. We decided
Yeah.
to make it more of like a Sunday morning small group, and it worked.
Yeah.
We had new folks come and they engage, and it was pretty fun.
How long did y'all have to be virtual only with y'all Zoom stuff?
Yeah, so the way it worked in our context, we rent from a school. So we were at the mercy of the school.
Throws
And
you
of
out of there.
course, yep. And of course, that was a challenge. We didn't have our own building. So we went 20 months being what I would call hybrid, probably about a year virtual. Then after about a year, we would do things like outdoors in the park, a gathering there. We would do something like a barbecue at my place, masked. And we had like two little micro churches going out at one point, which was a Zoom one with myself and then one at a restaurant nearby for those who wanted that in-person element. We did that for about half a year. And then, yeah, 20 months later, we went back to our Sunday morning gathering. And, full transparency, we're now a year removed from that. Part of me is wondering, like, is this what we want to keep doing? Is this really the most effective way to serve our community in a post-COVID reality? Because we, like all churches, lost a lot of people. They got out of the rhythm of coming on Sunday mornings, and I'm starting to think through: is there more creative ways to do this? And it's one of those things I'm figuring out in real time. So if any of your listeners have an answer, please tell them to send me a message on Twitter.
Well, I'm telling you, you need to. my buddy Fernie, who is on here, is a person I'm telling a lot of folks who are in an urban environment to pay attention to, because he's pulling off. He's in Baton Rouge, and he primarily serves. His context is like grad students at LSU, and then
Okay.
mid to late 20 somethings that found professional jobs in Baton Rouge and stuck around because
Hmm.
they didn't want to leave Baton Rouge. And they're meet once a month for what they call them large group gatherings,
Hmm.
and then they run a really heavy discipleship pathway. But that so like, what is your what was your decision pathway? Like, who are you making decisions with at All Saints about
Yeah,
these
yeah.
transitions?
Right. So what we do at All Saints is I have a co-pastor who's also a co-vocational leader. This might make some of your Baptist listeners fall out of their seats, but he works at a bar. He's a bartender, and he's also a pastor in addition to that. And he and I really work in tandem and make these decisions together. I do not recommend any pastor go co-vocational unless they have a person to work with because it's just too hard to do it by yourself. So he and I work together very closely. We also just have some key leaders within the church. One of the beautiful things about the Covo model is that you have to delegate, you have to equip, you have to empower, you have to give up a lot of control. So we have folks who have risen to that level and have helped out in that way. So, and a lot of it is like one big messy family. You know, we have town halls and team meetings, and everyone coming to my house for dinner. Let's talk about next steps. And we're definitely still that very crunchy, organic phase of church planting.
Yeah. And I think I went to seminary with some folks that are from the outer boroughs that you know, I had this assumption of New York, which was primarily Manhattan and defined by movies as a kid from
Hmm.
the deep south. I've been to New York a few times, but never left Manhattan. Or there's a hipster Brooklyn, but Queen, from what I understand, Queens and the Bronx and New Jersey and that, there's a lot more of a neighborhood feel to it than the average person would realize is going on.
Yes, 100%. Because the thing of it is, we as humans we're made to exist in community, all the way back to our ancestors existing in a tribe. I'm from a small town in Pennsylvania, and I hated living there because every time we go to the grocery store, we'd be there for 2 hours. My mom would talk to everybody, right? And just 2 weeks ago, I took my daughter to soccer practice, which is right next to Yankee Stadium, on a train. Took the train up there. We went to the bodega, which is like a little corner store, the deli. We rode the bus back to our apartment. We stopped by the flea market and the community garden. And everywhere I went, I saw someone I knew and chatted up with them, sometimes for a minute or two, sometimes for 20 or 30. And I remember looking down at my 4-year-old and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm putting her through the same torture I endured as a child. So I left a small town. A small town did not leave me.
Yeah.
And the reason that is that folks, a lot of people in the outer boroughs have lived there for generations. I mean, not all of them, but quite a few. And when you're in a big city, you're forced to rely on your neighbors more so than you would living in a rural part of the country where you don't even see your neighbors.
Yeah.
Here, my neighbors share a wall with me. They're across the hall from me. I hear them. They hear me. It's a different kind of life.
Yeah. Yeah. So what decisions or adaptations that y'all had to make during that 20 months of lockdown and then hybrid stuff? Like, what of those have redefined, your leadership, but also just the life of All Saints?
Yeah, I think the first thing is it really gave me an open hand posture. And I think I've always thought this, but I don't know if I ever actually lived it, that Jesus does build his church and that we don't have to be tight with our time, money, resources, strategy, that we can be open handed with those things and dedicate them to our Lord and that he will multiply, just like the bread and the fish. I mean, our church plant at the time of COVID was averaging, 25 to 40 people on a Sunday. And pandemic hit, we were hit hard, and we decided to, raise as much money as we could from internal and external donors and then give it all away. So in that course of that 20 months, we gave away over $20,000 to strategic initiatives around our city to help the most vulnerable, especially the undocumented, the houseless, what have you. And that's pretty profound for a church as small as us and as new as us to give away that much money
Yeah.
during a time when it's like you might close. It's like, well, if we close, we'll reinvent ourselves down the road as something different. It's totally fine. That's really giving me a posture and confidence. Like, holy crap, Jesus does build his church. I'm like, I don't have to be in control. I don't have to be the one calling the shots. I don't even have to be the person who fits our church into the mold that I think it should be, because it looks really different than I thought it would 2017 when I was picturing what our church would look like down the road.
Yeah, just from Twitter, I kind of know that like you've served in mega churches before, like that whole idea. Like I came out of that mode. I feel like a lot of people in ministry that, and I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday that came out of that big church model and expectations and ends up going into planting. We instantly feel like that's the only other option there is, and then we learn that there's a completely different style, but there's also
Mhm.
different expectations and experiences that just aren't our frame of reference. And I think a lot of us learned that the last couple of years. Uh,
Mhm.
and so like, what about your leadership has changed over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have gotten a lot less. Let me take a step backwards. Let me tell a story.
Okay.
With what we preachers do. Very early in our church, probably 2 or 3 months in, I had a very charismatic worship leader, and he sometimes would lead worship for like 45 to 60 minutes. Now I'm not like a touchy feely, I was discipled by Tim Keller's cadre. Like I'm a Presbycostal. I probably identify closest to that. Like I'm not in a 60-minute long worship. I mean, I know folks are that throws their hair back. That doesn't do it for me. So second or third month we planted, hour-long worship set goes on. I told his worship leader, listen, man, I'm giving you 25 minutes. You got 25 minutes because you gotta get me up there to preach. That's why this church exists, right? So 60-minute worship set goes on. I preach, we leave. I'm walking home with my wife, and I say, I'm gonna fire our worship leader. And she goes, why? And I said, because I told him he can't do his long worship sets anymore, and it's driving me crazy. And she said, listen, Eric, everybody in that room had a really good time except for you.
Yeah.
So you need to get the stick out of your butt and just give up some control, because that was an amazing service. And she was right. And I don't think I would have learned those hard won lessons unless we had gone through something like a COVID that disoriented everything. And now I'm a lot more like, if someone wants to lead worship for an hour, cool.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not my thing, but it's everyone else's. That's good enough for me. So kind of giving up that reign of what I think a church should look like or service should look like has been very disorienting, but at the same time very freeing, because I realized, oh shoot, this is not Eric Hoke Ministries. This is the people of God together gathering and worshiping, and that looks differently than what I think we should look like, and it should,
Yeah. It's all
because I'm
thanks.
not. Yeah, exactly. I'm not who I'm trying to reach, right? I'm not.
Yeah.
So therefore, why would I make a church that I would like to attend? I should make a church that the community needs, and that's been a huge mindset shift for me.
Yeah. I remember, I've been part of 3 plants and then led the last church I was at. I led that and was there for 9.5 years. I remember somebody telling me one time, they said, oh, church plants are great because it gets to look exactly like what you want it to look like.
Mhm.
And I kind of been laughing. I was like, I wish that was the truth. Um, that just, COVID, I think I'm glad that COVID made me more uptight, but I had to learn that lesson a different way. So like, if you could do one thing over from like that 20 months, what would it be?
Hmm. I suppose if I were to look back, I I had a new baby that was born in October of 2019. She spent 2 months in the NICU, then had two surgeries, and then COVID hit. So my family was going through a lot of our own personal trauma. Then the pandemic hit, so we piled that on top. And I definitely know the first like 6 to 12 months, I was not pastoring people I had as well as I should.
Yeah.
And of course, anybody would be like, well, listen, Eric, you've been going through your own stuff. Why didn't you give yourself some slack? And I mean, I do. But when I go back again, I would have said, you know what? I got to designate a little bit less time of the outreach oriented stuff, a little bit more time realizing there are people in my congregation that need care, that need love, that need support. And I need to call them, email them, text them, when it's safe to do so, meet with them more often. I mean, I talked to a pastor friend of mine about the same thing. He's also a pastor of the Bronx, and he's like, listen, the pandemic hit and I put all my attention in caring for my people. And I was like, oh, dude, we made the opposite mistakes because I put all my energy in outreach.
Yeah.
And I think there should have been a finer bounce there.
I know what's interesting is, every person so far I've talked to in this series, the way they've answered that question or the leadership change question has talked about the way they take care of people.
Mm,
Like that's been the answer or the idea that nearly every single person has. Uh,
yeah.
I'm thinking a lot about like why that is, but so to kind of moving forward a little bit, and we kind of talked about this at the beginning. At some point in time during the last couple of years, you realized that your kind of permanent vocational design would most likely be co-vocational.
That's right.
What was it like processing that and making that decision?
Um, I'm having a lot more fun doing Covo ministry than I ever did doing pastoral ministry vocationally. And there's a variety of reasons for that. For one, I don't feel the pressure I used to feel as a full-time pastor. I don't feel this expectation of like, hey, these folks are literally paying for me and my family's living. So I have to be, the provider of religious goods and services to them and be at their beck and call. There's a lot of freedom in that. I don't feel a sense of having to, cater to the whale of the congregation, the big givers. And that's been great. I think the hardest thing for me is figuring out, and I've gotten much better at than I used to be, but figuring out things like healthy rhythms for your life, observing the Sabbath, taking time off, an actual real time off, like your phone is off in the closet, you're not looking at it. Traveling and enjoying time with my wife and kids. Figuring that part out has been a huge game changer. But in terms of like, grief and loss of like, oh, I don't know if I'll ever be a full-time pastor. Don't really feel strongly about it either way. In fact, this morning I was on a call with a group of leaders, and one guy asked a really interesting question. He goes, "If your church became 300 people tomorrow, would you quit your job and go full time?" I'm like, literally, I have no idea how to answer that. Like, I don't know. Like, the better part of me thinks no, I would stay co-vocational and kind of raise up more leaders and get more part-time staff. The other part of me would say, yeah, I'm tired. I want to, I just want to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
But I'm also wired like you, Chad. Like I have to have a lot of plate spinning. I enjoy that and I thrive in that.
Yeah, and I think that for a lot of times when people are good plate spinners like I am, when we get bored, we start throwing more plates in the air to keep ourselves
Mhm.
excited.
That's
Um,
right.
and so that's it. So let me ask, do you think that so for your style of the way y'all's church is with your attitude, just the way you're made, the way you do things, do you think just the deep neighborhood centric community makes it easier to be co-vocational?
Yeah, 100%. Because when you're in a community like I am, folks are already working multiple jobs.
Yeah.
Right? They already have side hustles and businesses and things that they do on the side because they can't afford to only live off their salary. So it's totally a norm. And where in my context, I could see how maybe in a more affluent suburban context, it might be a little bit more strange. Like your pastor does what? He works all week,
Yeah.
or she works all week. That's a little bit different. But in mine, it's pretty normal for sure. And the other thing that's really beautiful about it is what I'm doing is easily replicable. So our church plant has planted two other churches, one in East New York, Brooklyn, and one in the South Bronx. And the reason that I could do that is because I don't have a model that says, hey, to launch a church, you got to have $300,000 and 75 adults.
Yeah.
I have a model that says you can launch a church in 40, 50 grand a year, even less. And you can work and you can have your family. And there's ways to do it to build leaders. And folks who don't have access to large amounts of capital are able to make, call it a micro church or a small expression of the kingdom, but it's able to be multiplied, it's replicable. The big box church model is not, especially in the inner cities.
Yeah. Well, I know I've got a friend of mine down in Lake Charles on the Gulf Coast of Louisiana. They were planning on doing a traditional church plant. And it was during the pandemic when Hurricane Laura came through, they were given a
Mhm.
building and he was getting a full-time salary from another church. And the hurricane literally took the other building off the slab.
Whoa.
And so they immediately had to start chatting. But 6 months in, he's back working full time in finance at a bank. and they're running out of people's backyards in a city that's still destroyed from a hurricane. And they've got, I think at one point in time, they had 3 different micro churches of about 40, 50 people in backyards. And it's like,
Right.
and I had lunch with him earlier this summer. I was like, how do you do this? Because it's just crazy. And he's like, we don't have anything to do. He said, we're just with each other, and then we take care of each other. And he said, so I think that it can be replicated in so many ways. I think that the proximity piece is what helps, is when people already are neighborhooding good, I guess.
Yes.
Which it sounds like
Yes.
y'all have. Like where I moved from, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, there was a huge, like we call it the back porch culture. Like every night, we lived in a small neighborhood, one way in, one way out. And we told people it was like college, except you were grown up and had a little bit more money. And like people would like put their kids to bed and bring the baby monitor over to their friend's house 2 doors down and just all hang out on the back porch. And so you'd have 10 baby monitors plugged in and
That's so cool.
yeah. And it's like it's not that culture is not really where we live now. But, I've been thinking about that model so much. And when you eliminate just all of the things that most church folks have to worry about, you really do have the time to pastor well and work elsewhere. So that leads there. I think the thing that I really I think it was when you talked about writing a sermon in 1 hour is where I really started paying attention to you. That tweet thread that day. Then, talk about I help pastors get jobs, because apparently you believe deep enough in the co-vocational thing, and then the ministry in the corporate world, where you started a company, started working with pastors on this.
Yeah, that's right. I had a revelation. I mean, I had some mentors and friends really speaking to this and encourage it. But like I shared, the pandemic came through my neighborhood, the church plants closed, the pastors left, and there's a variety of reasons for that we don't need to go into. But the only real difference between myself and some of those other churches was that I was the only co-vo guy. I was the only person that wasn't relying on the church to pay my income. And a mentor of mine said, Eric, like I know you don't think this way of yourself, but what you've done, getting a job in for-profit Manhattan work and believing in church, is pretty rare and pretty special. I'm like, yeah, I guess it's kind of cool what God did. And he said, you should figure out a way to help other pastors do something similar. And I'm like, come on, man, no one's going to care about that. You know what I mean? Like most people are like I was. They look at Kovo as the JV of ministry, and it's it's a waste, and you're not a real pastor because you have a day job. So I did what every New Yorker does the last week of February when all the kids were out of school. I packed all the kids into the minivan with my wife, and we drove to Florida to escape the New York winters. And one afternoon, I was on the beach in Miami, and I realized, you know what? What's the harm in making a $12 website online, a PDF? I used the story brand Don Miller stuff about how to rebrand yourself as a marketplace professional. And I don't have a huge social media following. I have a few folks on Twitter and Facebook that follow me. We'll just put it out there and see what happens. And to make a long story short, that was 6 months ago. That was March 2022. And about 600 folks are on that mailing list right now, receiving a weekly newsletter from me about how to rebrand themselves. A lot of them became coaching clients, resume rewrites. I have a digital learning community that we meet twice a month to talk about this sort of stuff. And yeah, I got one guy right now who went to Baptist Bible College, went to seminary, worked at a pretty large established church, moved up here to plant a church, realized I'm going to run out of money because there's no money in this, and is now in conversations with Adidas to make an $80,000 a year job. And he never in a million years thought he could have done that. He's like, all I've ever done is church. But I said, listen, man, you can do a lot. You just have to learn how to communicate what you've done in a way that makes sense to hiring managers. So that dinky $12 website is ihelppastorsgetjobs.com. The PDF is still there. It needs to be updated, full transparency. I'm a little behind on that. But you can go on there, you can get all my emails and all my good stuff. And if there's any listeners who say, listen, I got to talk to Eric, I offer free coaching calls, 30 minutes long on Zoom. I'd be happy to connect with you and kind of hear more of your story.
Yeah. And so have you seen more folks, and it's just my curiosity piece here. Have you seen more folks wanting to pursue being co-vocational or trying to find like full employment outside of ministry?
So I get that question a lot. So this is how I break it down. 50% of the pastors who call me are what I call tire kickers. And if you're a tire kicker, please don't call me, because call me when you're ready to make a jump. They call me and they say, yeah, I saw your stuff and I'm thinking maybe 18 months from now looking for a new job. I'm like, okay, I got 3 kids, 3 jobs. I live in New York City. I don't have time to talk about this. Like, call me in 18 months, dude. So that's half the calls are 2 minutes long.
Yeah.
Then 40-ish% of the calls are that, Chad. It's, I'm burnt out. I'm done with ministry. I need to get out completely. And I mean, those pastors need to be served as well.
Yeah.
So some of them leave on good terms, some of them leave on not so good terms, but that's about 40%. And then about 10% are the co-vocational pastors who are like, hey, I've been full time. I realize this is not sustainable. Therefore, I need to find a new way to do ministry. And I really want to see that number go up. In fact, I'm working with a colleague right now to build a whole entire cadre on how do you kind of repurpose your role as a senior pastor to a co-vo leader. How do you give away ministry for others to lead in a more flat leadership structure? And something of that sort. I mean, it's still very much wet cement, but if there's anybody who wants to be a taker for that, I don't want that number to be 10%. I want that number to be 100% of pastors who call me say, I'm not leaving ministry. I'm not tire kicking. I want to rethink how I lead my church. And I want to learn more.
Yeah. And I think also, I remember when we were going into church planning, I remember feeling how lucky we were to be part of a denominational system that did seed fund crazy stuff. But you also think that the people who don't have those systems when they're going into planting, thinking about just co-vocational from the very beginning.
Yep.
So, man. Well, I know that your plant story, COVID story had to be interesting because of the bivocational reality and the things you've talked about with flat leadership structures, just understanding that. But then also the way that you're serving pastors who are a lot of times having to make really tough decisions.
That's right.
And I remember when I was discerning transitioning out of full-time ministry, the first question every single person asked was, how are you going to take care of your bills? And thankfully, like I'd already had an offer come in of what I could do, but I know that I have talked to so many pastors that are trying to figure that out. And their terrifying question is, oh my goodness, what do I do?
Yes.
Or they're given, a 6-month Sabbath period to try to figure things out. And they're on month 5 and it's not figured out yet. And that sort of, so that's why I also just wanted for folks to hear from you about that, because you are doing something in ministry that I've never heard of anybody else do. I mean, it's not usually, I don't know. I know in the Deep South, at least, when you leave ministry, you go sell cars or insurance.
Right.
That's it. And you just sell cars and insurance that people use to pastor. But what you're doing is just incredibly different. So I just appreciate you with what's working on there, but then also is coming on and sharing with us. So if there's one thing that you would like to tell people just about y'all's experience with COVID or your experience like being co-vocational or with I help pastors get jobs, like what would be that one thing to leave folks with?
Yeah. First of all, thanks again, Chad, for having me. This has been a lot of fun. And I think I would end with this. A co-vocational pastor is not half the pastor. A co-vocational pastor is twice the pastor because they have a ministry in their church and in the marketplace. So if you're listening, you have skills. You've led a church, you've led a congregation, you've led people. Those are skills that the market will pay a lot of money for. So take a risk, believe in yourself, call me. And if you're ready to make the leap, let's make it happen.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, just want to thank you so much for coming on again. And y'all make sure you go check out his stuff and with what's going on. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Chad.
I was excited to get Eric on for this Pandemic Pastor series. I've got a couple more of these that are just back there in the archives that I'm saving for things. And it's like I said, I'm saving for things. This is Advent. A lot of us just, life is crazy right now. And so the next couple of weeks, we might have episodes, we might not have episodes. It's a one-man shop here at Productive Pastors, just me doing the things. But I also have something kind of cool I want to let you in on. I'm just going to kind of go ahead and do this. If you're hanging out this long, you deserve to know some things. I have completely rebuilt the Season 1 workbook. into a full-fledged 11-module course. And it should be getting turned live sometime in this weekend. It's the exact same content, but it's been reformatted to be easier to engage with, to get the worksheets, to watch the companion videos, to learn from the lessons, all that sort of thing. It's the same price. It's the permanent price of $50. And so you get this, and especially when you spread out and look at all the things that come with this, this is an incredible, incredible, incredible value. Now, you might be saying, Chad, I've already bought the workbook, but now you're doing extra cool stuff. Well, you can relax. The second this goes live, I'm going to send you an email. If you've already bought the workbook, I'm going to send you an email with a code so you can get the course side of this exactly the same. I decided to do this for a couple reasons. One, it's a better way to engage. Two, it's just an easier way to use and deal with this content. And the third thing was this: I can update it a lot easier. And so that season 1 workbook is being relaunched as my new course. It's called Becoming Productive. There'll be a link in the show notes to this if you've never gotten this before, and if you want to start off with the course. It's 11 episodes, 11 modules, all about what does it mean to grow your own productivity systems in your own life. It's one of the first of the 2 cool things I'm working to have turned out before the end of the year. I'll tell you more about the second one when it gets closer to that. But thanks for being part of this awesome community. Make sure to review and rate. Do me a favor. Spotify is telling us data about people who share podcasts via text messages. If you dig Productive Pastor, would you consider texting some of your ministry friends and colleagues about share an episode with them through Spotify and let them know about the podcast? So, that's it. Chad's here. We'll probably have another episode before the end of the year, but it's the holidays. It's Advent. We're normal people, but I can't wait to see you back next time.